I'm Jackie Glazier. I'm Associate Professor of Clarinet at the University of Arizona, and I'm excited to be here also with Melissa Kendi, who both of us are on the ICA College and Pre-Professional Committee. And we are starting this initiative, which is these fireside chats with professionals in our field who are doing different things. And we're really excited to be joined today by Brian Corbin. So, Brian, I just wanted to ask you if you can talk a little bit about your career path and what you're doing now.
Sure. Thank you for having me first off. Exciting to be here and to share some things with folks from all different backgrounds and career paths. And I'll tell you sort of the short version because we could be here all day. But as you said, my name is Brian Corbin. I run B Corbin Clarinet Products. And as of now, we're basically a specialty clarinet shop that manufactures and distributes clarinet stuff. I have my own line of accessories, mouthpieces, barrels. We sell various brands of clarinets. We're the distributor for Royal Global. But the real question you're asking is kind of how I got here. And so I'll tell you that I've done a little bit of everything, and I bet that part of my early career path lines up with a lot of folks, hopefully, who are listening and to this and interested. And I'm a kid from Virginia. I was always the quintessential band nerd. I hope no one takes offense to that, but that was who I was, and I took great pride in that, to be honest with you. And I loved music. I thought at the time, middle school and high school, I was going to be the world's next greatest band director, right? The greatest band director and conductor the world has ever seen. And that was my hope. I felt that I had such a positive experience with music and that it really changed my life. And I bet, again, there are a lot of folks who feel the same way, that music was the thing that identified with them in school. And maybe if they didn't fit in other places, like I certainly didn't, I did feel like I felt, a part of something when I was in band class. So I wanted to be a band director, and so I went to the Indiana University for my undergraduate degree in music education, because that's what you do when you want to be a band director. You get a degree in music education. And amazing school, had a great experience, amazing teachers there. But as I came down towards the end of my degree, I started to see the environment that music educators were in. And I thought to myself, I still want to teach, I still want to be a band director, but I was like just getting good at the clarinet at the end of my degree. And I know that sounds crazy after spending years somewhere, but I was really a part of a school in the studio with Professor Howard Klug that didn't matter if you were a music education student, you were going to have the same standards as the performance majors. And that was really, really helpful for me because even though not to throw any shade at the performance majors, I had a much tougher load in terms of scheduling than the performance majors because they're expected to practice, right, during times where I'm doing other things. So it's tough early on, but by the end, it really helped me become a better musician. And I thought to myself, I can always teach, I can always keep up my degree and my skills. But if I go to teach right away after my undergraduate degree, I'm maybe a little concerned that I won't have the opportunities to perform that I felt like I wanted. And so I went to Florida State University, go Noles, for my graduate degree in performance. And again, my thought process was still that I would end up as an educator. It was never that I wanted to just drop that. But as I went to Florida State, I realized there were other opportunities that I didn't have at Indiana. Certainly a lot of performing opportunities, right? A lot of local orchestras, and you could travel a few hours and you could pretty much hit an orchestra everywhere. So while I was there at Florida State, really, really honed my skills and as a performer. But the thing that's missing in this conversation is, well, what about the other skills that I built while I was doing my music education degree? And so I actually have a story that I'll tell you that really impacted kind of my trajectory. And that is, as a music ed student at Indiana and most places, you have to do observations. So you're going into schools and you're watching other teachers teach, right, to become a better educator yourself. But what hit me hard when I was doing those observations was I would go into a school and I would see students that didn't have functioning instruments. And as a band director, you only have a certain amount of time and abilities to fix every student's instruments. That's not going to happen, right? So a lot of these students couldn't progress because they didn't have the necessary equipment. And it was at Indiana University that I started learning very basic repair with the sole goal of helping my future students so that I could have basic skills to quickly get their instruments in at least playable condition. So I kind of honed my skills sort of on my own there at IU. When I went to Florida State, there really was not great repair skills and repair people around. And so I was able to fill that gap there. And I just kept getting better and better. So while I was getting my music ed degree, while I was getting my performance degree at Florida State, I was also trying to learn a little bit about repair, which of course then led to things like learning about acoustics. I took wood turning lessons at Florida State to learn how to what would end up being my first product, which was a barrel, which I know you both have some experience with,
Mhm.
and that really made me think, So I wanted to teach and I wanted to play, and I can still do all of those things. But I'm also realizing that there's an ability to do something else with my career. And I wanted a lot more of my time back. I wanted to make sure that I had the necessary skills to set myself apart in the industry. And so, pretty much once I graduated from Florida State, instead of going to get my doctorate, which I was kind of pushed into doing and doing other things, I said, look, I have quite a bit of student loan debt. I know other people can relate to that. I want to see what I can do working for myself. And so I started a little repair shop. The other side of the story, by the way, is my wife, who's currently in the Navy. We knew she was going into the military, and so I had some flexibility there. But by doing that, I was suddenly able to travel to universities, do master classes, do repairs for students, and really expand what I thought was possible because I was also freelancing, right? I had a private studio. So now I ended up using that music education degree. I was using my performance degree, and I was utilizing skills that I learned and honed while I was at both of those universities. And so today, we have our clarinet shop. We have several contractors and employees that we work with that try to get the message across to everybody. Hey, there's a huge market here. You can do what you love, and you can do some other things and still make a great living.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know I personally have had such great experience with your products and with you as a person, honestly. So whenever people ask me, "Oh, what's that funny looking barrel you're playing on?" It's like, "Oh, it's this guy Brian Corbin. Like he's amazing, obviously with his work, but also with his, just personality and being so personable and just a genuine human, which I think is super important during this time." But I think a good follow-up question to kind of tie into everything you just said. Did you have any mentors or even people that you just were kind of conversing with as you were getting into this field that's a little against the grain, especially for the time period that you started? Anybody that kind of assisted you or gave you ideas, kind of along those lines?
Yes. And what's really tricky is, it's like I can't say everyone, and I'm going to leave someone out, right? But the truth is, when I think of mentors who helped me along my path, I go all the way back to
Hmm.
even my middle school band directors, right? Because I really do believe that I can go to every single teacher I have had in my career, and every one of these people I've interacted with, they've all helped me in some degree. Even people in business who I didn't necessarily have a great relationship with, or things didn't end well, but I learned from that. And you have to be willing to admit that. So, short answer is yes, long list. I go back to my amazing music educators in middle school and high school who basically told me they knew my ability. I had good skill. They were all music educators, and they were like, look, you better love this so hard because if you're just doing this because you're good at it, you're going to get a wake up call. And I had very unique teachers who were willing to, and I don't want to make it seem like they were trying to talk me out of doing music. What they were really doing was pushing me hard to make sure that there was nothing else I possibly could do and be just as happy. And there wasn't. This is what I wanted to do. So at an early age, they were my mentors to make sure I really wanted to do what I was doing. Down from my middle school teacher, my private teachers, my high school teacher. Of course, when I went to college, my teachers are also my mentors. But specifically, you're kind of asking about, I think, my career path. And
Mhm.
the truth is, there's nothing set and dry about what I did. There's no book that was written to follow my path. There's really no, yellow brick road that I could follow. And so I learned a lot from everybody that I interacted with. I think about the guest clinicians and performers and educators that came in. I watched every mouthpiece maker who came to our school work. I bugged and asked questions from all of the specialty shops that would come through. And so they maybe didn't love this young kid, kind of asking these questions or watching from afar. And I totally get that now that I'm on the other side. But the truth is, what other opportunities do you have? You're at university for a reason. You're there to learn. I had mentors in the form of my own personal research, right? I read, books that had nothing to do with music and business, and books that had something to do with music, and books that had something to do with business, and you put all those together. So throwing out names is really tricky because I know I'm going to forget people, but pretty much my educators were my number one mentors. They told me things that and helped me understand things that till you're in the field you just don't know. Like I said, all of the guests we have, it's like you can always when I go to schools, I can always tell when I do a master class or a clinic which students kind of have that mentality because at the end of the class when I say hey feel free to come up and ask me any questions or I'm like hey ask questions, right? It's the students who come up to me after who are asking certain kinds of questions that I can tell, okay, they're trying to figure out their own path, right? There are some students who are amazing players and all they want to do is win an audition. And to be honest with you, a lot of them don't feel like I maybe have something to offer. Like maybe a student who's like, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do. And so those were my mentors, those people who let me ask those questions. In terms of the repair side specifically, I was very self-taught early on. So, I worked at a music store when I was in Indiana, teaching lessons, running their rental program, selling guitars, right? And they had an instrument repair tech. I would go back and I would bug him and I would watch him on my time off, unpaid. I'm watching what he's doing, right? The Clark Phobes and the Dave McClunes and the Ramon Watkowskis and all these guys who would come to our schools, I'm there looking, I'm reading all of the books. So, yes, I know I'm not answering your question directly by name dropping, but I think the important thing is to learn from every person you interact with, learn from all the experiences that you interact with, because you're never going to know which one of those experiences puts you on a trajectory to where you need to go.
No, I think that was a perfect answer.
Yeah, Brian, I just want to follow up on that and on a couple of things that you said that I've been thinking about. So you mentioned being in, going to do visits, observations, and noticing that there were instruments that weren't playable, and thinking about that. And I'm just, I thought about you saying that and thinking, wow, that took a person who was looking at a bigger picture of what they were there to do, and also saw a need, and then saw that maybe there was a way that there could be a niche, there could be a gap filled. By skills that you didn't even have yet. And I'm just thinking about like your open-mindedness to also think about other things, because in school we're sort of set on these traditional paths because there are majors and it's like you're either going to be a performer or you're going to be an educator, and there's not a lot of training outside of those kind of modules. But in reality, most people who are in music are not just performing or not just teaching, or they're doing lots of different things. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about like what other things or qualities you think are important to have that helped you succeed, that helped you think outside of the box, and also feel confident that you could do something that you didn't have a model for. Mm-hmm.
That's a really great question. And first off, I'll tell you, this is another big part of the clinics that I give, which is helping musicians understand that the skills they're building now musically are the same skills that people in the business world use to be successful. Just because you're applying them differently doesn't mean they're not applicable. And so I'll go back because I think your first statement was, I went into these schools and I saw something kind of a bigger picture. Well, to me, the picture was pretty small in that I saw myself in those students, right? So I was a sixth grade band kid who, look, I don't come from a wealthy background or a lot of resources. And so my first instrument was a old beat up, I didn't know at the time, in disrepair Bundy plastic clarinet, right? That was basically your pawn shop special. And so, guess what? My first year of band, I wasn't that good. I didn't, I didn't stand out. Let's say. Now I know sixth grade, for us, first year of band, no one's maybe really standing out, but I wasn't that good. But I knew I liked what I was doing, and I remember it like it was yesterday. Because I had such interest, we invested in my very first Buffet B12, right? Which was like a big deal. And it was a new instrument and it was working. And guess what happened? My seventh grade year on, I was pretty much the best one in my. Now, I'm not saying it was, just because of that clarinet. What I'm saying is I had an instrument that functioned properly. And now I'm able to progress at a level that is consistent with my education. And so that's what I saw when I went out to those schools. I saw students, man, if that young student had access to an instrument that worked really well, they could put in the same amount of effort and grow even more. And so, yes, one skill is being open-minded and having a vision and seeing yourself and others and seeing others and what you had to do. Specifically about the skills that, kind of go both ways, I think about as a musician the things that you have to train to be better at. One thing is simply being there as a musician in an ensemble or as a soloist, your stage presence, for example, right? We all remember, I'm sure, our teacher telling us to put our instruments this way or on this way, or how to sit up and all of that for the audience. Well, guess what? That works to your advantage when you have to do things like be in front of a group or public speaking, right? All these things that transfer really well into the business or entrepreneurial or academia, world as well. Um, Having to problem solve as a musician. We don't often think about this, but every time we are performing or we're playing or practicing, we're problem solving in real time. Sometimes it's, oh man, I'm playing and this reed feels soft. I better adjust somehow to compensate. Or you're reading music and you're seeing a key change and you have to, shift in your mind, your problem solving. Guess what? Those same critical thinking skills are the skills that people are using in the business world or trying to learn how to develop your own career. There are other more practical skills, but I think the most important thing is being open-minded, like you said, Jackie, but also understanding other people's perspectives. So I come from, I have an amazing family and I never wanted for anything. So I want to be clear about that. I'm really proud of my roots. But I was also around people who had significantly more resources than I did or our family did. And I maybe early on felt like I was at a disadvantage, but later on, I actually felt like I was at an advantage. And what I mean by that is, you hear the adage, sometimes people have to work twice as hard to get half as far. And when I look back, I don't take pity on that. I love that I was around a diverse group of people because it let me see how others thought about certain things and where they came from. And that drove me even harder. Things like building musical trust with people you play with. We don't often think about this, but if you're in a chamber group, even if you're in a wind band or an orchestra, you're building musical trust with the people around you, right? I have to trust that if I'm playing principal, the second player is going to be able to hold down these notes with this intonation. I have to be able to trust that that entrance is going to come and we can pass this off. Well, those skills, building that trust, which can take time, or sometimes it's inherent, are the same skills you're going to have to do outside of that world, right? In the business world, for sure. If you're teaching, you have to trust your colleagues, right? You have to trust a lot of things. So there are so many skills that perfectly translate from what we're doing as a musician to the business world, building your career, collaboration, networking, right? Everything that you maybe you're learning in school, but they're not calling it these things. Well, guess what? The business school is teaching them the same stuff, but they got fancy names for it, and they're just putting it in a different package, but really it's the same.
Great. I think I would like to hear a little more about the trajectory of your like your shop and your business. If we can dig into a little more of some of the reality factors of that. So, I mean, monetarily, especially when you first started making things like your barrels, and your mouthpieces later on. Did you have to like invest a certain amount to get started with that? How did you kind of go about building this business when you started your repair shop? It was probably primarily repair, and then later on you got into making your material. So how did you kind of get from point A to where you are now? If you can go into a little more detail about that.
I can, and I'll preface it by saying, look, this is the boring stuff that is like crucial, right? It's the stuff that, I'm probably not going to get a million views of me talking about the financial aspects of this, but the truth of the matter is, it is a reality, to
Mhm.
your point, Melissa. And so, again, I went to IU and I did get a lot of money for scholarships. But when I say a lot, it's relative to what it actually costs. So I did get offers for full rides at other places, other schools. And much to my parents' chagrin, I turned those down to go to Indiana because even, I mean, I did get some money, but I thought that was the place I really wanted to be and I was going to do well. And the teacher had a great pitch for me to come there. So I say that because guess what? That meant student loans. So by
Mhm.
the time I left IU, and then I went to grad school at Florida State and was an assistant there, teaching assistant there. Even though you get a tuition waiver, guess what? You still have to figure out a way to pay your real bills, right? Groceries and rent and everything else. And so again, student loans. By the time I graduated with my graduate degree, I was about $150,000 in debt, okay, and student loan debt. And I'm just being real with you guys because I bet other
Mhm.
people are possibly in a similar boat. And so that debt, talking to a lot of people, they're like, oh, don't worry about it, right? Doctors and lawyers all have massive amounts of debt and they still make a lot of money and they're paying off their loans well into their, adulthood. Okay, that's great, but I didn't see myself making 300, 400, 500,000, a million, right? I didn't see myself and still really don't at a high income level as a doctor and a lawyer. So I knew that something had to change. And so my business, when I really think about when my business started, meaning, just before I started making barrels basically and really doing repair for money, which goes back almost 10 years now. I was relying on student loans to pay my bills, and I was also working behind the scenes. So at IU, I was working at Melody Music Shop. Again, I told you guys I was teaching lessons, I was behind the counter, I was doing all of that. When I got to Florida State, even though I was a TA, you still have to find other ways to make money, and that's really where I was doing the repair. Well, I started learning wood turning lessons. I started taking wood turning lessons in Tallahassee. And was paying a pretty reasonable price. I don't remember what it was, but for an hour of training, it was like, I don't know, maybe 50 or 75 bucks, something like that. And guess what? I also had to run up some credit card debt. So yes, I did invest, and
Mhm.
unfortunately, part of that investment was debt. But when I really sat and thought about it, I said, wait a second, I could invest, several thousands of dollars, go into debt for this thing, which I'm viewing as education. Nobody bats an eye when they say, "Oh, you're going to pay for college." Or you're going to pay, you know what I mean? That's education. So the stuff that I was doing was education. I ruined instruments that I got on eBay, learning how to do repair. I probably destroyed gems of mouthpieces earlier on. And guess what? That's education. I was educating myself. So, yes, there was an investment in terms of time and education. From a financial standpoint, when I was learning how to do making barrels, I was doing it by hand on a wood lathe at first. And if you're familiar at all with how lathes work, like that's not practical at all. It took me literally all day to, from start to finish to make a barrel, and on a wood lathe. And I'd have to charge, I don't know, 600 bucks for that barrel for it to really be profitable. That's silly. No one does that in this day and age. We use CNC machines, metal lathes, things like that. And so I was just learning the fundamentals. My first year when I said, "Hey, I have a product I really like, my focus barrel or my traditional barrel." that's when I knew I had to step up my game. And so I found a machine shop who actually also did, specialty clarinet stuff, but a machine shop who took my design and my drawings and they were able to basically make my blanks for me, now saving a huge amount of time. And so, guess what? That's an investment. Now I'm paying someone else to do a lot of that early on design, but I'm hand finishing them to my specs. So, my
Mm.
first year in business, I'll tell you, I, of course, lost money because I invested initially more into how many barrels, I could sell to make that up. Right. The second year in business, I think I made, I think it was like 23 or $26,000. And for reference, that was my second year in graduate school. So while I was in graduate school, right, and I was using, I don't know if I should say this, but I was using like Parent Plus loans and grad loans. Right? I took those loans out. I took a loan out to buy my bass clarinet, right? That's an investment. So that's where that $150,000, in debt comes from when I graduated. So my second year in business, I made, a little bit of money at the end of the year, a couple $1,000s. So that's where the investment comes from. Think about tools, right? Think about all the materials, like you mentioned, Melissa. All of those things really adds up. And so I was just going into debt, basically, just with the goal and the vision in mind that someday this would pay off. Just like when you go to university, you're thinking, okay, in 4 years from now, I'm going to be in a better position than I am right now. So there was an investment needed from me. The other thing you want to think about from a financial standpoint is all the different types of investments that you can make, or hey, who's willing to give me credit? Who's willing to let me pay in 90 days or 120 days so that I can get these materials in and then start that process? All of those things are really important. And as you go further into this, you realize how much financial education is needed, which we don't get a lot of that in our traditional career paths, right? That's something I recommend to everybody listening at whatever age. I guarantee you there's something you could learn about that financial aspect of it. Now, my business is established. And so once I showed a few years of being able to run that business and eventually turn a profit, now all of a sudden people would love to loan me money, right? They would love to give me a credit line, right? I don't jump at that because debt isn't great. You have to go into debt a lot of times, right? But if I don't have to, I won't. But there is just so much to think about. How about as a freelance musician, thinking about taxes, right? And
Mhm.
keeping up all of your expenses and your income, right? The legal contracts and things like that that are involved, the budgeting, goal setting, the insurance. I mean, I'm telling you, it's all the stuff that musicians, especially freelance musicians, independent contractors need to think about, but it's the stuff that's taught as like a 101 class in business school. Why don't we all have that education in music as well?
Mhm.
I
I
completely.
really appreciated how you paralleled the financial aspects of what you were doing to the more, traditional path of university. I thought that was a very good point that you made there.
Um, Brian, I'm curious when you said you were talking about when you finally got a barrel that you liked and you were kind of, ready to start with that. How did you go about promoting your business? How do you still promote your business today? Like how do you manage the growth, I guess?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the first thing was I'll go back and tell you the first barrel really came about because I was playing on, my second R13 at that point. And it was, people would disagree, but it was blown out, so to speak, right? I mean, it cracked to pieces at that point. It'd been pinned. It just lost its life in its core. And so I was doing the thing a lot of people do is you try to find equipment to make it work. And I didn't have money to buy a new instrument. And so my first product, actually, my Focus Barrel, was designed specifically for my old R13 to give it some more hold and core and life and a little bit extra working resistance to the sound. So for that reason, the only promoting I really needed to do was, hey, students in my studio, try my stuff and tell me what you think, right? How about having, at least at that point at FSU, how about having a partner and my current wife now who also played clarinet and could give me feedback? Subsequently, I ended up finding out what I made for me, she hated. And so I made a second product so that she could also promote my stuff. So early on, the promotion was simply going to clarinet players and saying, "Hey, try my stuff." And sometimes it works, and sometimes it didn't, and that's the life of what we do. That's okay, right? Every even when you don't like it, it's a learning experience for me. So then, of course, okay, now I have a couple of barrel designs. Well, let me share this with a larger audience. And it just so happened that my second year at Florida State was the first year that I went to an International Clarinet Association Clarinet Fest, right? Happened to be in Orlando that year. So I was already in Florida. And I said, oh, you know what? Let me go show up to Orlando and, invest in the ICA to get a booth and show my barrels. And I did. And you know what? It was like it kind of took off because at that time, of course, there were the established names of people doing stuff in the big companies, but there were only, a few small time makers maybe who were easily accessible. And so I went there and found that, wait a second, there are a lot of people who would really benefit from the things that I was doing. And then after that, I realized, okay, it's time to do the social media thing, right? Got to get my own company Instagram and Facebook page because there's really an audience out here that I have to captivate. And part of that, of course, does it for itself, the social media posting about it. But how about as my second year of graduate school advanced, I would reach out to fellow alumni and people who would maybe come through to do a master class, right? I think about a lot of you guys who I saw in
Mhm.
Florida, I would go to, I would get invited after starting some communication to go other places. I remember going with Professor Estrin to University of Florida. I remember, Sunshine Simmons at University of North Florida. I believe, like, there's all these great people who are willing to have you in, and I never take that for granted. And so that was promotion for me as well. The repair side of the business, I was mostly self-taught, and I really recommend if you're going to try to learn repair please go like study with somebody, go to repair school, learn because I took the long, hard route. And now I think back like, man, people I was doing repair for even just a few years ago, I'm so much better now. I would be embarrassed by the work I was doing, back then. But the promotion side of it is a constant thing. You asked about what I'm doing now, and a lot of the same things. I'm going to now even more shows. I've been to every domestic clarinet fest since 2018, right? I've been to many, universities, people who have me out, and sometimes smaller schools, they don't have funds maybe to get you there or to offer you. And so you have to take some risks and hope that you're helping people and that one day down the road it'll just come back to you. And I really believe that. I, of course, am still using social media, but I'm also trying to meet people kind of where they're at. So before, maybe I wouldn't have gone into a middle school and did a middle school clinic because I figured, well, middle school students are not going to be in a position to purchase my products. And what value is it? Well, there's a ton of value because as an educator, you get excited about students who then get excited, right? And guess what? Now I've been in the business long enough, I kind of feel old, that some of those students who I actually saw in middle and high school are now graduating college and remember that experience. And now they're asking for equipment help and things like that. So everywhere I go, whether I'm performing, I'm trying to teach, I'm at a business, I'm always promoting myself and as authentic of a way as possible.
Yeah, it's really interesting too. I think about how connected everything is, and Melissa spoke earlier about what a wonderful like person you are to work with, and it's coming from a place of like, hey, try this, see if this helps you. It's not like a pushy sort of thing, and and those relationships are built because people trust you, they try your products, they trust your products, and clarinetists love to talk about their gear. They love to be like, what's that barrel you're playing?
For sure. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you kind of took the long and hard route, and I kind of wanted to piggyback off of that. So if there were people, students, young artists looking to go down either a similar or kind of a parallel path, what advice might you have for them?
Yeah, it's really tricky because sometimes I'll do this and I tell people and they're always like, "Oh, you're so comfortable and confident and this and that and the other thing." And I'm like, "Look, inside I'm dying usually." I like many of us, right, suffer a little bit from that imposter syndrome. Like, man, why would you trust me, or what have I done, or what have I given you to give, to earn your respect, right? And so I always kind of suffer through that. And so for that reason, I've always had a little chip on my shoulder, like I'm gonna figure this out no matter how hard I have to try or how late I have to stay up or whatever. And now as I get older, that might have been a great mentality to have, but now I'm like, wait, how can I learn something easier and cheaper and more efficiently? And who can I talk to become educated without wasting, more of my time than I have to? So the advice that I always give is first off, keep your mind open, search for opportunities even when they're not obvious, right? And never overlook the resources that are imminently available to you right now, right? For example, like I never thought when I was at IU that I would miss the music library, okay? But now I'm like, oh my gosh, like to have that resource or to have, all the online resources available to you as a student, you're not going to always have access to those. And so let's say someone's interested specifically in the repair route. There are resources available online that can teach you some basic stuff and some fundamentals. There are repair courses, and I recommend you look those, up for sure. But there's going to be no replacement for working with somebody individually. And so for that reason, let's say you have the ability in your trajectory to take out a year or two to go to repair school. I recommend that, right? There are not that many, but there are a few in America where you can learn some repair skills and then become employable to a local music store. Because guess what? We don't have enough technicians right now. There are not enough in the world. Of course, I think those courses can sometimes, the online courses can be great to learn basic skills for your own instrument maintenance. But if you're trying to build a business, you really want to go study and learn from other people. I'm actually going to be doing that this summer and learning from people, skills that I have yet to really develop to a high level. Now, in my business, I do have other techs that work for me now who I've hired, and many of those techs know more than me, which I love, right? I'm humble enough to admit that when someone can do something better than me, I'm going to let them do it. I'm going to pay them to do it, and so that's what we do. Let's say someone's looking to go down the business route. Again, there are tons of resources available. You better be somebody who can learn to enjoy reading if you don't. YouTube, how about the amazing resources that YouTube has to offer about things like, again, all the way from repair. I think like Music Medic has a lot of great videos about repair. And then on the financial side, start listening to podcasts and people who are trying to teach you about how to run a business and your financial goals and planning and all of that kind of stuff. So be open-minded, take advantage of the resources that you have, search out resources to learn those skills. And then the other thing is don't be afraid to ask your teachers and mentors about their experience, right? You'd be surprised that several of my teachers, I didn't know until later down the road that they also owned homes that they rented out. So they were real estate investors. They never said that, right, to us as students because maybe they didn't think about that as something that could be really helpful to us. But I'm like, wait a second, you're a teacher here teaching me all these amazing skills, but you also have side income and other things going on that's keeping you and propelling you. And so I bet if I would have asked them, they would have told me. But it's like you have to know what to ask because they're getting paid to be your clarinet teacher and that's what they love to do. And of course, be better people and musicians in general, but they have no ability to teach you everything, right? And so ask those questions. I think that's really important. To me, it comes down to one thing. It's simply education. Be willing to be educated, be willing to search out the education, especially the free education, right? And don't be afraid to ask questions. If you come up to me and you ask me about something, I answer the same questions all the time at conferences and schools, all the time. And the truth is that that tells me exactly what now I need to be educating on in the future. If everyone's asking the same question, right? The money question. They're asking about time. They're asking about the skills and where to learn those skills, right? That means that we need to be doing a better job of giving these resources to students at an earlier age and helping them realize what's possible. Because I'll be frank with you, when I was in Virginia in high school, I was, one of the top players, three-time All-State, blah, 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 fancy awards. But guess what? When I went to college, I was not the top. I was probably the bottom, to be 100% honest, or, very near the bottom. But I would say I was probably the worst one at a school where I was surrounded by great musicians. And initially, that made me think maybe I'm not doing the right thing. That was a short-lived thought process because then I realized not everyone is doing the same thing. There is a place for me somewhere. You just might have to create it for yourself.
Those are very great points. Thank you.
That's amazing, Ryan. Thank you so much for all the wonderful advice that you've given today. I know this interview will be really valuable to our clarinet community, and yeah, I just really appreciate it. Thanks.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure. Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely.